Okay, so I want to start off this overview track with talking about the history of computers. In our first lesson, we're going to talk about the way computers have evolved over time and how they became to be the devices that we use today. So first, I ask you the question, what are computers? And it's okay if you don't know. They have several definitions. It can be devices that are meant for storing, retrieving, or processing data, or simply just machines that carry out processes that they're programmed to do. However, it's important that you know the difference between a computer and a monitor. Often people mix up the two, and I'm going to explain to you why they're different. A monitor, if you look at this picture right here, is the device that displays the information on a screen. Whereas a computer, which is within this case, is the functional hardware that is responsible for performing those processes. Of course, a computer comes with several accessories now. It can come with a router for network, a mouse, a keyboard, and even a printer. So when I ask you the question, what do you think of when you think of the word computer? Some of these devices probably come to mind. In fact, all of these devices are related to computing technologies. The iPhone, the Apple computer, Nintendo Switch, Xbox, and even a MacBook or any laptop all have similar computing technologies that connect them in all sorts of ways. But let's take a look at where this all started, the evolution of computers. Computers weren't always thin pieces of hardware with glass screens that have amazing animations. In fact, they started off as really basic components with minimal function. So let's go take a look at how they evolved over time and how they became to be the devices we use today. In fact, something you can do right before I go into the fun facts is go and ask your parents what computers looked like when they were young and growing up, and ask to them what features computers had, because it's likely going to be something extremely different from what you're used to right now. So going into fun facts, there are some fun facts I want to introduce you guys to so you can learn some interesting and really cool things about computers. The first is that the first computer weighed over 27 tons. That's almost 60,000 pounds. Incredibly heavy. And it took up 1,800 square feet, which is almost 2/5 the size of a basketball court. Imagine a computer that large. Sounds intimidating to me. The next is that the first known computer programmer was a woman. Currently, men dominate the computer science field, but it's nice to know that all of this was started by Ada Lovelace, the first computer programmer. Using only one row of the keyboard, you can type the word typewriter as the longest word. You can try it out and let me know what you guys think. Another is that an average person blinks 20 times a minute, but when they're using a computer, that is reduced to only 7 times a minute. And lastly, and then one of the most fascinating facts, is that some of the biggest tech companies, including HP, Microsoft, and even Apple, were started in a garage. You don't need a big fancy workspace to start a $1 million company. So now let's get into the evolution of computers and how they came to be what we know them to be today. In 1613, hundreds of years ago, was the first mentioning of the word computer. It was first used in a book, and generally it didn't refer to a machine, but a person that performed calculations. Later on, in the 19th century, computers would begin to develop, and the word would shift from meaning in the sense that it no longer referred to a person, but referred to a machine that performed calculations. Later on, about 200 years later, we have the difference engine by Charles Babbage. This is the first automatic computing machine. It can take sets of numbers, compute them, and then print out the results. Babbage created this with the help of Ada Lovelace, like I mentioned before, the first computer programmer. Unfortunately, due to a lack of funding, Babbage couldn't complete this, and the London Science Museum completed it in 1991 and finished it in 2000. Years later, we have the Z1 by Konrad Zuse. He was a German. This is the first binary programmable computer. It can be programmed through punch tape and a punch tape reader, and it had a keyboard through which it showed its results and by showing a flashing row of lights. However, one of its most unique features was that it didn't use decimal numbers. It used binary numbers. If you're unfamiliar with the term, decimal numbers are numbers that have decimal points and often are represented in decimal notation as opposed to fraction notation. This can include 1.1, 5.3, 2.4, and infinitely many numbers. However, binary notation is when a person uses zeros and ones to express all of the numbers. This was unique during this time period to use binary notation in programming computers. Unfortunately, the Z1 was extremely unreliable and slow, and it was destroyed in World War II in Berlin, but the German Museum of Technology made a replica as shown to the left. In the same year, we have the creation of the Turing machine by Alan Turing. Alan Turing is considered the father of the modern computer. And the Turing machine is considered one of the first occurrences of the modern computer. Essentially, Turing was able to create a computer that most closely reflects or resembles the computers that we use today. It was capable of computing anything that was computable, which was considered to be a lot during this time period. And the machine printed symbols on paper tape, mimicking the effect of a human writing down symbols on following instructions. In fact, Alan Turing created something called the Turing test, which essentially tests computers to see if they would be able to mimic the actions of humans, something that's reflected slightly in the Turing machine. A year later, we have the Atanasoff-Berry Computer, or the ABC. This was an electrical computer, and as you can see to the left, it had no central processing unit at all. It was unable to be programmed, and it ended up using 300 vacuum tubes for computation, math, and logic in general. There was also the ENIAC, which was another digital computer during this time. It was also fully functional, but it was ruled that the ABC was the first digital computer. Also later on was that Eckert and Mauchly, who created the ENIAC, would found the Electric Controls Company, making it the first computer company in the world. In 1944, we have the Harvard Mark I computer. This was considered to be a mainframe computer, and essentially it was a calculator. It performed really basic computations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. If you think about it, your iPhone could do more than this large computer. But this was used to help the war effort during the time in World War II, and it's known for being extremely large, as you can tell from the picture. It's roughly 8 feet tall and 50 feet long, with 3 feet in depth. It weighed a total of 5 tons, and there were 730,000 separate mechanical parts included that all had to be powered by a 4-horsepower engine. As you can see, this Harvard Mark I computer required a lot of parts and a lot of detailed and intricate bonding between all of the different parts, and was extremely complex, but simply performed basic calculations. Later on in 1955, we have the Whirlwind Machine. Created by MIT, it was one of the first computers with RAM, random access memory. This was a significant moment because prior to this, no computers had random access memory, and having this feature allowed computers to really begin speeding up their functionality and make them more efficient. It also had real-time graphics, another thing that prior computers lacked. 1964, we have the Programma 101. This is considered to be the first desktop and first computer to be mass-marketed. It was roughly $3,200 each, and that would equal about $26,000 right now. Can you imagine paying $26,000 for this? This doesn't even look like something remotely close to what we would consider a computer today. But technically, it is considered a computer, although its primary functionality seems to be simply performing basic computations, as if it were a calculator and printing out the results. Nothing special. 1975, we have the Altair 8800. This appears to be just a simple rectangular box, but inside this rectangular box is a mess of hardware for this computer. This is the first personal computer and could be operated at home by a person without any technical expertise or assistance from an expert. This was something new during this time, and the term PC began to be used more often, referring to this as a personal computer. In order to display input or output, a series of switches would be used in terms of inputting data, and the lights would reflect the output. Also in 1975, we have the first portable computer, or the first laptop. The IBM 5100 weighed 55 pounds. This is truly large. Imagine carrying out around a 55-pound laptop wherever you go. It's not as portable as we would like. Later, we have the Osborne 1 by Adam Osborne, which is considered to be the truly first portable computer, weighing in at 24.5 pounds. Definitely much lighter than the first, but still not ideal. It had a 5-inch display and 64 kilobytes of memory and cost roughly $1,795. If we take a look at these two laptops, we can see their displays are relatively small. If we look at laptops today, the screen takes up almost the whole side of the upper part of the laptop. This shows you how laptops themselves have evolved over time. Before, they were extremely large, extremely bulky, extremely heavy. They had very tiny display screens and bulky keyboards, reflecting almost nothing similar to what laptops we use today. So you can see how laptops began here with looking like a big rectangular box to what they've become today, where it's sleek rectangle. Later in 1983, we have the Lisa computer. Lisa stands for Local Integrated Software Architecture. The first commercial PC with a graphical user interface was considered the Lisa computer. It was designed around a physical hard disk, which was a feature that would eventually lead to its failure in the marketplace. The Lisa computer had many difficulties and problems that were often costly to repair, something that wasn't exactly appealing to customers. But as you can see, the Lisa computer did resemble what an early computer would look like. The display screens, as you can see from the last image, have significantly gotten bigger, and the overall size of the computer has decreased significantly. With a keyboard and a mouse added, the computers began to evolve into what we consider them to be today. Like I said, computers continue to rapidly change, so let's take a look at how they changed into the devices that we use right now. 1990s. Computers became so much more capable of providing new media, and they were faster and more efficient. They were still large and bulky with small screens, as you can see over here, but they did shrink in size from prior years and grew closer to the devices that we use today. Leading up to the 2000s, we have the first 64-bit processor that becomes open to the human market. The iPhone was also created, and it brought many computer functions to the smartphone. The iPhone is an extremely important invention to our generation and started off the era of smartphones as well. Almost everyone right now has a smartphone, and I can't imagine where our generation would be without them. Also, if you take a look to the right, you see the PC or the computer, and you see the difference that it has made in the past decade. It's gotten increasingly smaller, the screen has gotten much bigger, and the overall monitor thickness has shrunk, growing closer to the devices we now use. Lastly, in the decade of the 2010s, Apple releases the iPad and jumpstarts the era of tablets and opens the market to so many new products. Later on comes Apple Watches and speakers and Bluetooth devices, things that are all essential to our daily lives now. In the 2010s, we also had the first reprogrammable quantum computer. It had the ability to program new algorithms into the system. In fact, if you look at the laptop over here, you can also see that it resembles virtually the same thing that we use today. Laptops are very thin, extremely large screens, and flat keyboards with the small mouse pad. You can see now how these computers have changed so much over time. The evolution of computers. They continue to evolve into what we know them to be today, but this evolution is one of the most fascinating. I mean, you can understand how the computer starts at this one-piece rectangular box and transforms into these two tablet devices or smartphones and iPads that we use today so easily. Touchscreen is one of the most important and one of the most significant inventions and advancements that have been made over the past years. And just imagine all of the new advancements that can be made in future decades. If computers have been able to evolve this quickly in the past few decades, imagine what they'll look like in the next few. So that was the overview of computers. I hope you guys learned something really important about and the significance of computers and their history and evolution. And I hope you were able to connect it back to the computers that you use today to see how the parts changed over time and it grew into the devices we use. If you guys have any questions, feel free to contact me. If you want this presentation, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll see you guys in our next lesson.